Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 22 of season 6, and we are stalking the waters of our series, The Summer of Sharks. That's right, we all know Jaws, but this summer we are going bigger, toothier, and downright absurd. Forget Sharknado. We've got the weirdest shark horror movies right here all summer. We started the summer with Sharks of the Corn and Sharktopus. We revisited Jaws. So it makes sense that we tackle the sequel to the greatest shark movie ever made. That's right. For this episode, we watched Jaws 2. All right, Matt can't be with us this episode. We do miss him, but he will be back with us next time. And I'm kind of sad that he's missing this because I can't believe we haven't talked about Jaws 2 yet. Just a little bit of background for this film. This came out in 1978. It was directed, now I hope I'm saying the name right, Jano Schwartz. Actually, the same director who did Somewhere in Time. So I know Mel and I have talked about that movie before. But he also, same director here. And then we also have the same writer who wrote the original Jaws, which came out in 1975, Carl Gottlieb. And then, strangely enough, he also wrote The Jerk, among many, many other films. And then he wrote it this time with Howard Sackler, who was a script consultant on the first Jaws. And there were several returning actors for this, including Roy Scheider, Lorraine Gary, who played his wife, and of course, Murray Hamilton as the mayor. So I mention all this because for a sequel, this had a lot of involvement from the people who originally created the first movie, which I always think helps make it a better sequel than if there had been, really no ties and they were just solely going off the name itself and the popularity of the movie. But this was a very popular movie. So popular, in fact, that it was the third highest grossing film of 1978 when it came out. So that year, the first highest grossing movie was Grease. The second was Animal House. And then Jaws 2. So it had the status of the highest grossing opening weekend and the highest grossing sequel of all time. And it held on to that for many, many years. So it was a very, very, very popular movie when it came out. I found an article where it had Roger Ebert talk about the movie, and he said, this is a quote from him, that 1978 was a year when people went to the movies to escape, to be entertained, and not necessarily to think or be challenged. That sounds a little bit like a little bit of a cutting, sarcastic remark to me, but I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to escape and be entertained with movies. But Jaws 2 does deliver that. It kind of holds on to a lot of what we loved in Jaws. There are some things missing, I think, but we'll talk about it. But it also, it's a pretty good just summer movie as far as easy watching. So I see why it would have been a big summer hit. This was my first time watching it. I have thoughts. Mel, I'm curious to know what your thoughts about this movie are first, though.
Well, this was my first time watching this movie as well, and I don't really know how to encapsulate my thoughts. So I guess I'll just talk about some of the things I was thinking as I was watching the movie. I totally agree with you. I think this is a good kind of summer flick. I would watch this movie in a theater. Like if they brought it back to theater, like with Fathom Events or something, I would go watch it. I think it was entertaining, especially in the end with all the children screaming, and they really kind of upped the threat factor there. In fact, in some ways, I feel like Jaws was a bit more active in this movie than the first one because we talked about the issues they had with the mechanical shark. I think that was a pitfall sometimes because the shark obviously looked fake at times. But there definitely was, at least in the kind of second half of the movie and toward the end, much more of a shark cam playing with the music, picking people off one by one, as opposed to the first movie. I also feel like, even though I just said that, there are long swaths of time in this movie where I'm just kind of like, I want Jaws to come back. Like, I would, I wasn't getting bored per se, not like some of the movies that we watched this summer, some of the really bad ones where you get kind of get really confused. But I wrote in my notes at one point, Jaws, please just do something, because there would be these long, long scenes of like the children talking or plotting to do certain things or the sheriff. And there just wasn't enough like emotional heft or even explanation or scene setting going on in the background to make that work, I don't think. So when the action wasn't there, the movie just felt like, to me, it dragged just a little bit. And playing on that, I thought it was interesting that even though people returned for this, and I know, I don't know if we'll get to this or not, but listeners, there was a lot of kind of, I believe the director was like the second director, and there was some quarreling and irritation amongst the people involved. So Jaws 2 was also beset with issues. Um, but like the mayor is still mayor, even though he like is kind of responsible for all the people dying in the first one. And while he's a little chiller with Brody this time, there's another evil guy who's a developer who wants to market the island to people buying land and building homes or resorts there. Um, the people don't really seem to be thankful 4 years later that the sheriff did what he did. And I felt like Brody's character, we really see that like almost like PTSD of it because he's just so scared it can happen again. But the people around him, just even though he saved them, they really don't seem to care. It's more like, okay, we took an economic hit and now we got to bounce back and we're just not going to believe this guy again. And I found that kind of weird. I felt like more setup needed to be there about the town and what had been going on to make me a little bit more emotional invested beyond just like the kids are going to be in danger and the sheriff isn't believed all the time. But like I said, it's not as good as Jaws 1, but it's a decent movie. And from what I've heard of the later incarnations in the Jaws series, what Jaws 3D, Jaws Revenge, and it goes on, I think, a couple movies. I've not heard good things about those. So I think, Lisa, we chose the correct Jaws sequel to watch. I'm afraid the other ones might have led us more on the path to like Sharks of the Corn
I mean,
type insanity. Yeah.
I agree that I think we picked a good sequel to watch, just because I think it's because it had so many people attached to it who were attached to the first one. And really, when you think about it, and I'm not defending this movie as like a great movie. It was better than I was expecting. It was much better because I, like you, have heard about all the other Jaws sequels and just how terrible they are. And I've never had an interest in going down that path because I love Jaws. I love that movie. Um, and so I did enjoy this one more than I thought I would. But listening to you talk, a few things occurred to me. Number one, generally the rule with sequels is that you're going to do more of what was good in the first one. And like to some degree they did because there was like a boat explosion like 20 minutes into the film. I don't know exactly when, but it was pretty early. I was like, "Oh, they're already exploding things." Um so that was kind of interesting to watch. Like there was that you could tell that they were playing to the audience's wants in this movie. Um But I was worried that when it first started that it was just going to try to be too much of the same because right away you get, okay, here's the sheriff, here's the mayor, they're in the town, they're doing their thing, and a shark's going to attack. It's summer at the beach, all the tourists are coming in, I thought this is really going to be the same movie, and that wasn't what I wanted. So I was pleasantly surprised that they in the changes they did make. I kind of liked the way Brody's like character like plot not because it's not really a character arc, it's more just his plot in the film. I like the way it unfolded because when the movie starts, he is kind of the hero of the town, but people have forgotten. I think this movie is supposed to take place in like kind of real time from when the last movie started. So it's like 3 to 4 years after the events of Jaws. So there's been enough time on this small island that I think people have just not that they've forgotten the shark attack, but like his 15 minutes of fame as like town hero has that's kind of like fizzled off. Like people don't care anymore basically about the fact that he saved them, which I thought was kind of a relatable thing. I wish they had done more with that. I liked that you saw him being kind of hyper vigilant because when you think about Jaws, a lot of the action was him out on the water. And so he was just out there with two other people. So the people on the island didn't get to see like yes, they probably remember like shark attacks, like oh the summer that the shark attacked and people died and it was probably a sad thing in their mind, but they didn't go through as much as he did. So in this movie, he's hyper vigilant when it comes to things happening and he's worried right away that, there might be another shark attack. So I thought that was really interesting. I also kind of liked the direction they went in where because there was a moment on the beach where he causes a panic and he shoots a gun when he shouldn't and he ends up fired for it. And I thought that was really kind of interesting because they were almost playing him up to be like the hysterical one. Now, obviously, he had real reason to be concerned. And of course, he goes after the shark because that's the plot of the movie. But, normally we don't get to see that play out. I mean, a lot of times when we talk about like people who are being hysterical or being accused of being hysterical, that a lot of times that is female characters. And so I thought it was really interesting to see the plot play out that way where people were like you're overreacting. um which I don't know, I kind of wish they had played that up a little bit because the other plot, there was that plot and then the other plot was the teen plot, which was interesting in its own way because we just didn't get much of like what was happening with other people on the island in Jaws. So I was interested in seeing that dynamic, but it was like two different movies that really only came together at the end. So that
Yeah,
was kind of interesting.
yeah, I think the two different movies description is perfect because I don't know about you, but I felt like there were so many kids. I had trouble sometimes towards the beginning even figuring out which ones were Brody's because they just didn't focus on them enough. Like apparently the kids like to go sailing and Brody didn't want his kids on the water because he was afraid, which I find Brody as a character and his plot the most interesting in the movie because it's the most nuanced. He's the one who's damaged because of what happened before. And like you said, he gets what they think is hysterical. He interprets all these different things, including the orca that's been bitten. And the boat that exploded, the girl who basically covered herself with gas or that shot a flare because she was so afraid of what was happening. He's primed to interpret all these things because of his fear and like what happened to him before. That was interesting, and it is affecting his family life too, and to the point where he almost like completely loses his identity because he's fired, but he's still using police property and calling out choppers and things like that. I think his character is really fascinating in the movie. But then the kid plot is so I feel definitely makes it scarier, right? Because the kids are all screaming and terrified and traumatized, like intensely. They focus on that a lot. and the danger to the youngest child too. And people are eaten. I mean, they definitely up the stakes toward the end, where Brody can be a hero again. But yeah, I just like, I mean, the girl with the feathered hair who like almost kind of forced them to go out, even though they weren't going to go. I just was like, this is like feathered hair girl. Like I didn't know the kids enough to even get their names. I just was thinking that I think I said to you earlier, like one looked like a young Napoleon Dynamite. The girl had feathered hair. You know, one guy yelled a lot. And I don't know how you fix that other than to have fewer children, maybe. But when you said it feels like two different movies, that kind of was like, yeah, that was what was. I felt like there were two kind of plots pushing and pulling against each other until you get to the end where they mesh when Brody shows up to share to save them, and then we don't see how what that does. Like, how does that affect his relationship with his kids? So I don't know. I felt like there was so much going on. It was just like here's something, here's something, here's something, like being thrown at me, and it didn't always connect. And I'm not saying that it was unwatchable by any stretch of the imagination. I love watching it, but I just it seemed like there was a lot going on, and it wasn't they didn't always pause and kind of have the nuance I felt like I maybe needed. I don't know. Maybe it's effective to have all the island children together in one place getting attacked by jaws, but I found it hard to fully I don't know. I cared about the kids, but like I just didn't know who they were and what their motivations were other than Brody's kid is rebellious. I don't know. What did you think about the kids?
I thought it was really interesting that it it seemed, especially after we've watched all of these shark movies, the this summer, the bee shark movies, the plot tends to be, I think I even at one point connected them to slashers. Like they remind me a lot of like B horror movie slasher films. It's just instead of a person masked with a knife, it's a shark. Maybe with two heads, maybe with six heads, just depending on the movie you're watching. This all of those are like teen movies. Like they're all teenage, college age kids who are more interested in partying than anything else. And obviously the ones that were more like 90s, 2000s, you know, tended to be more like, oh, it's just kids going out to like drink and have sex, but oops, there's a shark. And this wasn't that, which I'm thankful for, but I did think it was interesting the way this movie almost anticipated those movies, just because here you had a group of teens who were in danger of really being killed. And you're right. The stakes were very high because several of them were killed. One thing that I did like about the movie, even though it came across a little bit hokey at times, and I agree with you about there being too many of them, I had a hard time keeping a lot of them, telling a lot of them apart. Like I was like, okay, there were several of the boys with dark hair, and then there was one boy with glasses, and then there was a couple of blonde girls, and then there was one girl with curly hair. But other than that, I can't tell you anything. One of the dark-headed boys was Brody's son, and then his youngest was also there, which added a little bit extra, I guess, of stakes just because you had the younger one there. Anyway, um, I did like that these felt like real teens to me. Like when I was watching it, it didn't feel like the other movies we've watched that have teenage protagonists. It seems to me a very movie version of teenagers. Like they're all very attractive. They're all wearing next to nothing on the beach. You know, they're all a little bit like silly and vapid. And these teens were more like what I would expect real teens to act like. Their rebellion didn't, like, yes, it put them in trouble, but it didn't seem to be like a really like terrible bad rebellion. It was more of just, oh, our parents are being overly cautious we just want to have a little bit of fun. Like you know what I mean? And I appreciated that. I also liked that they showed real fear when they were like going through what they were going through at the end when they knew that there was a shark out there and they had seen people die in the water. Because in the other movies, it was almost, and I think we've talked about this, but like the teens would get eaten before they even knew there was a shark in the water. Like they would be so oblivious to what was happening around them that they would just be like dancing or kissing or whatever they were doing. And then suddenly they were gone. They were just eaten. And in this one, there was much more of, oh, we are in a very scary situation. And so it showed that fear on their face and it showed them going through it. And I thought that was really well done. And I appreciated that now that I've seen so many bad Teen Shark movies.
No, Lisa, I think you're completely right there. That and well, and I had mentioned this too. Like these kids are like screaming and shaking and fetal position, arguing with each other because they're so scared. I do think it's a realistic portrayal of fear. And the more I think about it, the more I almost feel like the movie would have been better served to been like cut a bit so that it focused more maybe on the kids and we got the chance to identify them a little bit more than by their hair and who they looked like. um, but I feel like now that we're talking about this part, we might want to start talking about the last like 30-35 minutes of the movie, which is when Brody's been fired and he realizes um, because there, he finds out basically that his sons have left and he decides he's going to go and find out what's going on. So they find that scuba diver who was attacked by the shark and had an embolism. Nobody knows the shark was involved. They just know he had an embolism because he went up too fast because he was scared. And so Brody's like, oh, this must be it. And so he commandeers a police ship and he goes out to rescue the kids. And just like Jaws 1, he has his issues with the water and piloting the boat, but he manages to get to them. Meanwhile, the kids are like going through hell, basically. I think it was the first time a kid was killed, and that was when Tina's Joy, I think was the name of the ship. Tina and her little boat. Tina and her boyfriend, I don't even remember what his name was now off the top of my head, go separate themselves from everybody else in their boat and are just floating around. And Jaws goes after them, and I thought that was probably, even though those were some of the moments when the shark was out of the water that did not necessarily look like 100% like a shark. I felt like that was a really, really, really intense scene. Not just for the fact that it traumatized Tina and that the other guy died, but for the way that it was done. Like he's hitting the boat, trying to knock him in the water. The guy falls out, and he doesn't just eat him, and he doesn't just pull him down. He hurts him, then he grabs him, then he slams him at full speed into the boat. And then you see him still alive, even though he's like really messed up, trying to get in the boat, and then he grabs him down. And Tina's like watching all of this, and she basically just ends up completely breaking down and going into shock and hiding herself in the boat. And I felt like, even though later we see Jaws take out a helicopter, which I was like, I was just like, there, he's got to take out the helicopter. That's the only thing that can happen when the helicopter shows up. But I felt like that scene when she was traumatized by watching that terrible kill. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but I felt like that was extremely intense. It was almost more intense than I expected in this movie at that point because they were all kids. I wasn't sure how far they were going to go with what they're going to show or how it was going to be done. But I mean, I feel like that is the first interaction with them really made you and the kids realize that this is serious and this is terrifying.
That is an excellent point because, like you, I had mixed feelings about the actual shark itself in this movie. You mentioned earlier that that was one of the things that worked in the original movie's favor was that they had so much trouble with the mechanical shark that they were forced to hide it a lot of the time. They couldn't show what they wanted to show, and it worked well from a suspense and thriller aspect because parts of the parts of Jaws, the original, that are so terrifying to me are when the shark disappears. Like when it's been attacking and then suddenly they lose sight of it. There's that one scene where they're all out in the open water and they're trying to catch it, they're trying to kill it. And they've got eyes on it and you can see its fin and going, swirling around the water, swimming, and then it disappears under the water. And there's that moment of where is it? And that is really intense and really terrifying. And in this movie, I felt like we saw a lot more of the shark itself, which honestly, compared to some of the CGI stuff we've seen this summer, it was it looked great. It was great. But it also reminded me at times that I was watching a fake shark. And so it did pull me out just a little bit. But I think you're right that they used it to great effect because the shark teased a lot with the victims and showed that kind of malice that you were describing that was really effective to watch, really scary. And like you, because of how the kids had been attacked, I found myself wondering how far is this movie going to go? Because this is a long movie. Like I can't remember exactly how long it is, but it's not like a little 90-minute. I don't think it was. It seemed to me to be pretty long. And when I was watching that scene, like that end scene where the kids are out on the water and they're waiting to be rescued, it's a long bit of the movie. Like you said, it's maybe 20, 30 minutes of the movie in the end. And I did get a sense as I was watching it that none of them were safe. Like I even thought at one point, oh my gosh, are they going to kill the little boy, like the youngest? Because he didn't even seem safe at some point. And sometimes when you're watching a movie, you can tell that the main characters are gonna make it. You're like, oh well, they're gonna be fine. Like their friends are gonna be collateral damage, but they're gonna be fine. And in this movie, I really thought, how far are they gonna push it? Especially because when you're connecting it with the original, one of the really poignant scenes is the one where the grieving mother comes up to confront Brody and says, like, basically, you didn't do your job and my son died. And I thought for just a minute, I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to do some like dark mirroring to that? Like, I didn't know what they were going to do at that point. And so I think that made for those scenes in particular to be really tense and really suspenseful, but in a completely different way than the original was.
Yeah, I also thought that they might kill Sean, the youngest son, or the older one. I wondered if they might have Jaws kill the younger one because it would have also been like a terrible thing for the older one to have to carry, the older brother, since he had brought him along, because Sean had kind of blackmailed him, I guess you would say. But yeah, that moment when he was in the water and Jaws was about to get him, and the teen girl who had been taking care of him, sacrificed herself, and Jaws ate her. I was like, that was even closer than I thought that they might go. So I was like, well, all bets are off. Like Sean, Sean may not make it out of this. Yeah, I mean, I think they did a really good job toward the end of the movie of like by having those specific deaths showing you that like no one was safe in a way. I mean, I almost wondered if Brody was just going to sacrifice himself because I knew that Scheider wasn't in any of the other movies. So I was like, well, is he just going to sacrifice himself? Will the little boy still die? I mean, it was got super dark super fast after just being like a lot of times when the teens were in the water and Jaws didn't come, that we were just teased, or Brody thought it was there, or there'd just be like something that looked like a fin, but it really wasn't him. It went from like 0 to 60 really fast. And I thought it was interesting too that they put so many threats on the kids. It wasn't just that Jaws might get them. It was that literally if they weren't rescued soon, they would be lost in the Atlantic, apparently, according to them at least. And they seemed to know what they were doing when it came to boats and sailing. And so I thought that was an interesting way of, I guess, upping the stakes too, because they're not just scared of the shark per se. They're scared because they have no way to. It's not just like the unknown of what the shark is going to do. It's the unknown of what will happen if they leave, quote unquote civilization. Like they don't have a radio, they don't have a working boat, they don't have water, they don't have food. Like what's going to happen? I mean, at one point when they were yelling, I was like, whoa, this is almost getting to like, what is this, like Lord of the Flies or something? I mean, what is going to happen to these kids? Because they're just teens and they're like trying to survive this. Um, I don't know about you, but I was a little bit confused as to how Brody crashed his boat. Um, I guess that just shows that he doesn't really know what he's doing when he has a boat. But if we get closer to the end, just before the kids are about to like go out to sea, he shows up and is trying to help them, crashes the boat because the shark comes up and starts bumping them away from each other. And then he discovers the power line underwater with the winch, as two characters did earlier in the movie. And he then uses that, beating on it to use the sound that we heard earlier, attract sharks. I think from the scientist, who I wanted the scientist lady, Dr. Elkins, to be in the whole movie, but she was only in it for like 4 minutes. But he uses the sound of beating on it to draw him over, and just magic. He just happens to jump out of the way, and Jaws bites and is electrocuted. Um, what did you think about that series of events, Lisa, that ended the movie? We went from the kids like always lost to Brody's here to ships crashing, power lines happening, Jaws on fire.
Well, yeah, when he showed up, I was really relieved because, like I said, at that point, I had been practically biting my nails off, thinking, "Are they going to kill the kids? Like, how many kids are going to be left before they get rescued?" And you're right; it was really effective as far as the predicament that the kids were in. Even when the shark was gone, and you weren't worried about the shark, you were worried about like the current and were they going to be able to like stop themselves from drifting out to complete open ocean where they might not ever be found. That was a terrifying prospect. And so when Brody showed up, I thought, oh, okay, he's gonna save them, and then he can't get close enough, and then he crashes his boat, and I was like, what? What just happened? But then I remembered they planted that really early in the movie when he said he didn't know how to drive the thing. So I was like, okay, fine, another complication. But I was also wondering from the very early on when I said there was the boat that had exploded, which I can't even remember how it exploded. I
Oh
don't
wait, this
remember.
is the water skier boat, right?
Yes, the water
The
skier boat.
the girl freaked out. I wrote this in my notes because I couldn't believe it. So the girl freaks out, and I guess she tries to hit Jaws with the fuel can, but she pours the fuel like over herself. Like it comes out all over her.
Yes.
Then she shoots the flare at the boat full of gas and blows everything up.
Right. Like it happened so as I was watching it, I was just like, I don't even know what I'm watching at this point. But
I mean,
this
that was like
boat
pure
exploded.
panic. I don't even know, would we have done that in that situation? Like, make
I
sure
don't
you don't
I
pour
don't
gas
know.
on yourself.
It
Yeah.
it the only reason that stuck out to me, because I think it was pretty ridiculous and honestly it could have been cut from the movie. But the only reason that stuck out to me is, that's the whole point of Spielberg's like take on action films is they have to end in an explosion. And that was the end of Jaws. It was a very famous like setup for these type of like summer blockbuster action movies, that there's going to be an explosion at the end because that's what people come to see. And so when I saw that happen so early in the film, I thought, how are they going to kill a shark if they've already done the big explosion? I have to say, I was not anticipating them electrocuting the shark in such a convoluted manner, but I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. Like I truly, truly, I mean, the kids were like traumatized. They are all screaming. I mean, as you would, but just to see like Brody rig up this like crazy. I mean, he had like three wrecked boats and nothing else to kill this shark with, and somehow he manages to electrocute the thing in a spectacular manner. And it went on. I didn't time it, but we saw the shark get electrocuted a lot. So I was pretty impressed with that. I thought, okay, well, there you go. If you're not going to end with an explosion, then you start with an explosion and you end with an electrocution. Like it does seem like it's a step up from the original. It's out jawsing Jaws in that moment.
It kind of ended with fireworks because that's what it looked and sounded like.
Oh, well,
Um,
exactly. Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it
I
was
wonder
pyrotechnics.
I wonder if they only did the take once because it literally looked like at some points and some angles it looked like the Jaws model was burning. Like not a real shark. I don't
I
know if
mean,
you noticed that, but it I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a
it
machine
did.
burning." Yeah.
It did. I would love to know how they shot that and what happened because I imagine there's a story behind it. But I don't know. But it was quite the ending.
I will say this for them, like you mentioned with him not being able to drive the boat, I had actually forgotten about that. Unlike some of these B movies we've been watching, or maybe even C movies, they definitely did a pretty good job in this movie of planting enough stuff early on that the end did make sense if you think about it. The end was convoluted and wild, but yes, we know that he's not great at the sea, so I guess it makes sense that he would kill the engine and crash the boat. um we were told by the scientist Dr. Elkins, she said that a rhythmic low vibrations could attract great white sharks, and so that's why he decides to hit the paddle on the power line. Like you said, aficionados of Jaws would be like, what, when there's an explosion at the beginning of the film and not the end, but that's part of what gets him thinking about how there could be a shark. So yeah, I will say this for the movie, like uh even when there's times where it's verging on like what the heck is happening, you can always kind of, I feel like, think back to the power line was discovered earlier. There's all these little bits and pieces that you get as the movie goes on that become important at the end. So I almost feel like this movie is worth a rewatch, like in the summer, like get some popcorn and watch it again just to catch some of those little things that they work through.
Yeah, I think this would be worth a rewatch. If you haven't watched any of the sequels to Jaws, I would definitely suggest watching Jaws too. I mean, if you love Jaws, it's um obviously it's not going to be anywhere near the first, but yeah, I think it is. I think it is worth a watch. I read that, you know, Roy Scheider, I think, wasn't really that keen on joining this movie. But I think he had to, just from a contract standpoint with Universal. I think it helped that he was in the movie. I think it helped kind of keep that continuity going and having his character and his character story go through. I really do think otherwise it would have just been teens being attacked by a shark, and I think it wouldn't have had the same feel to it. I will point out that obviously, like, we did miss Hooper in this. Richard Dreyfuss wasn't going to do this. He was already working with Steven Spielberg. Close Encounters of the Third Kind had come out the year before, and I think he was on to much bigger and better things by that point. Um, so he couldn't be pulled in. But I think I remember at one point they wanted him to be a part of it, that he was going to be a part of the story, um,
Well,
with this. But once,
he kind of is because they call him and he calls back basically and says, "I can't come."
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think originally they had wanted him to show up. So, but once he found out Spielberg wasn't attached in any real way, he passed on that. But I do think that that's kind of interesting to note. Uh, just that Close Encounters of the Third Kind had come out only the year before, which is a fun kind of movie trivia moment.
And a movie that we've discussed on the podcast in our Alien series.
And the Alien series seems so far away. We've been talking. I feel like we've been talking about sharks for so long. It's just all sharks all the time.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa, for pointing out that trivia about the movie there at the end. And I think that's probably a good place for us to stop. We know that the remaining kids are safe, and we have the triumphant kind of happy music playing at the end, and we are done with Jaws 2. I'm not sure if I'll watch the other Jaws sequels or not, but I definitely could say it. I will watch, of course, the first Jaws, which is an amazing movie again, and I would probably watch Jaws 2 again as well. So, listeners, we are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we are doing, consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get access to exclusive content, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. We hope you're enjoying the Summer of Sharks. Thank you so much for listening as always, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.